Good evening. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual town hall meeting with District 6. We're very excited to see you virtually, and thank you for joining us for this meeting. We know things look a little bit different. You're watching us at home, and we're used to seeing you out at your community centers and all the different locations and getting as many of you in as possible, but we appreciate you participating virtually tonight. You can participate throughout tonight's meeting and ask some questions about the budget. If you're watching on Facebook, you can leave a comment right here in the feed. Or if you're watching at home, you can also send a text message to 55000. All you have to do is type in SA Speak Up 1 and send your question in. Joining us tonight to help answer your questions are Luis Maltos from Public Works, Veronica Soto from the Neighborhood and Housing Services Department, Kamala Kunau from the City Attorney's Office, Chief Chris Monastir from the San Antonio Fire Department, Chief William McManus from the Police Department, Heber Lefgren of Animal Care Services, Patrick Stuck with the Department of Human Services, Jennifer Harriet with Metro Health, Maria Villagomez, Deputy City Manager, and of course our City Manager, Eric Walsh. But to kick things off, I'd like to turn it over to our District 6 Councilwoman, Melissa Cabello-Haverda.
Thank you, Laura Elizabeth. Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight, District 6. I'd like to thank everyone for being here for our District 6 virtual budget town hall. This year has been very difficult for all of us. Many families are struggling to make ends meet. Budgets have shifted as we've all tried to navigate the pandemic, both city and, our family budgets. Everybody's having to make an adjustment. Like many of you who've had to make the sacrifices and cuts, the same is true of the City of San Antonio's budget. We're facing a budget shortfall of approximately $109 million over the next 2 years due to COVID-19. And that's why these meetings are so important. As y'all know, I take direction from my bosses, the people of District 6, so it's essential that I hear from you. It's vital that I understand what services are important to you in District 6. I sent out budget surveys to District 6 residents. If you haven't mailed yours back, please do so. I want to read all that you have to say about our budget and the cuts that we're having to make. And really what's important to you. If you haven't received one, please call my staff at 210-207-7065 and we'll mail you one. You can get those back pretty quickly. What I have received so far in these surveys has guided me to my current budget priorities, which are, of course, the health and safety of our residents. But also I'm hearing from you that you want to get back to our street maintenance, want our parks, library, and senior services back. And, we can only do so much with the pandemic, but that's really my priority in moving forward. I want to thank and acknowledge our hardworking city staff, City Manager Eric Walsh, Deputy City Manager Maria Villagomez, who along with our incredibly talented budget team and city staff are diligently working to balance our 2021 budget. I can't say enough about city staff and all that they do. After an overview of the trial budget, we will open it up for questions and answers. We have several city department heads here participating in this meeting, as Laura mentioned, who can answer your questions as well. So now I'll turn it over to our City Manager, Eric Walsh.
Thanks, Councilwoman, and thanks for inviting us all tonight. What I'll do is let me run through a really quick high-level budget presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions for everybody here tonight. The fiscal year 21 budget is balanced despite a lot of economic uncertainty. Our budget has got to be balanced by charter, and I presented to Council on August 6th a balanced 2-year budget for both fiscal year 21 and 22. Our overall 2020 budget is about $7.7 million less than it was in 2020. We continue to be focused on responding and recovering from COVID-19. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a couple of slides. It's changed the way some of our departments are focused, and that will continue into 2021. The budget has a number of strategic investments in public health and homeless and housing, and we'll talk about that. We have almost resumed our historic investments in the streets and sidewalks. As the Councilwoman mentioned, that's a priority for a lot of the council members in a lot of parts of the community, so we were able to make additional changes to that, and I'll talk about that. And as we developed the proposed budget, really what kind of guided the staff's work was I didn't want to propose a budget to the council that cut or reduced community services. Even though some of our services have changed, we don't know exactly what's going to be in place for 2021, what conditions will be. We wanted to make sure that all those services were fully funded. And the second thing was I wanted to avoid city employee layoffs, which we were able to do in the proposed budget. Next slide. So every year for the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a Speak Up SA budget survey. We had 22,000 participants take the survey this year, earlier in the summer. That's 14,000 more than that participated last year, so a huge turnout. And you see that the top contenders in terms of feedback were public health, housing, senior and youth services, public safety, and support for small businesses. So our combined proposed budget is $2.9 billion. It's made up of 3 main areas. One is our general fund at $1.28 billion, and that's where we collect all of our general revenue and where we spend all of our basic service funds. We have restricted funds of just under $1 billion, and those are our business funds within the city that operate off of their own revenue source. Areas such as the airport, development services, hotel occupancy tax, stormwater, and any grants we receive from the federal and state government. And then the last category of $641 million is our capital budget, which is majority of that is made up of projects that are included in our 2017 bond project for next year. So a quick reminder, I think sometimes we lose sight of kind of where the city spends its money. But in terms of community investments, within the 21 proposed budget, there is $342 million in what we call direct community investment, things such as housing, public health, mental health, child care, seniors, and homeless. And then for fiscal year 21, we have $291 million in federal grants. The largest amount that we received primarily came through the federal government's approval of the CARES Act. And I'll talk a little bit about the CARES Act on the next slide, but that was, there's been a big infusion of federal funding into municipalities, and we've directed a lot of that money, most of that money, back into the community. Next slide. So what have we done? We have the council approved in early June the Recovery and Resiliency Program for almost $191 million, really focused on 4 pillars. And the council went through a pretty public process during the month of May to identify what the priorities were. And so we have $75 million for workforce development, $50.5 million for housing security, $38.1 for small businesses, the majority of that going into grants for small and micro businesses, and then $27.3 million for digital inclusion, which is work that we're doing with 8 school districts here in town who have helped us prioritize 50 different neighborhoods where they had difficulty staying in touch with students during remote school last spring. And so we are working with them to help build up some infrastructure and provide those students with the ability to be able to direct connect into their respective school district networks. Next slide. So city services during COVID-19, a lot of our services have changed, and some haven't. Areas such as animal care services continue to operate. They've made adjustments at our adoption centers, but some of our programs have had to adjust and are still in that current state. Our libraries are doing curbside pickup and drop off of materials. We do have 9 libraries that have their areas open for public computer usage. Our senior centers are still closed right now, but the city has pivoted, and between Human Services and Parks and Rec, we are continuing to deliver meals to seniors at their homes. And some of our youth programs during the summer looked a little bit differently. We didn't have as many kids involved. We tried to reduce the counselor youth ratio in order to better manage. These are examples of programs that we wanted to make sure that we're fully funded next year. And of course, we're going to continue to monitor the conditions of the pandemic and where we are as a community, and hopefully be able to make some changes during the year and start to turn these programs back to their normal state. So I mentioned earlier, our proposed budget is $1.28 billion. The three main revenue sources, CPS, our payment from CPS as a result of our ownership of CPS is about 27% of our total general fund revenue. Property tax is 31%, almost $400 million, and sales tax is 23% and is projected to be $295 million next year. Now, we've seen some impact to our sales tax revenue both this fiscal year, and we expect to see that continued into 2021. You know, the other area at the upper left-hand corner, the other revenues, which are kind of everything else, has taken, a number of those items have taken a pretty large hit. Our EMS revenue is down, our transport revenue is down, our concession contract with the river barge contractor who had to shut down for part of the year, that revenue is down. Our interest on time deposits is down. So all told, the general fund is having to accommodate about $25 million worth of reduced revenue going into 2021 that we had to adjust for. And then our public safety total percentage is 64.5%, so below our financial policy of keeping those expenses below 66% of our budget. So as the councilwoman mentioned at the beginning, we did have to make needed reductions in our budget. Again, as we do a two-year budget, we've laid out proposed reductions in 2021 and planned reductions for fiscal year 22. And as we go through the year in 2021 and give the council quarterly financial updates, we'll continue to monitor our financial position so that we know as we go into the 2022 budget whether or not we can dial back some of these planned reductions. In terms of the reductions in the 2021 budget, we are proposing that there be no pay increases for any civilian employees, that we continue with our hiring freeze for all positions, all civilian positions, except those positions that we may deem essential, like a 911 call taker. We're making a slight reduction in street maintenance of $8 million. The proposed budget has $102 million in street maintenance, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. We're proposing to reduce police overtime at $3.4 million. Suspending our economic development incentive programs at $5.5 million. Reducing our reliance on the use of consultants next year. Making a number of other operating reductions and that total $1.6 million, but it's kind of a catch-all category. We're doing things like reducing travel throughout every department by 50%. There isn't a lot of traveling for business that's going on right now, and we don't expect that next year to pick back up. And the last category on that list is something that I shared with the council in June that I thought we might have to do. It's not included in the 2021 proposed budget, but it is included in the 2022 plan, and that is unpaid furlough days for civilian employees, unpaid vacation days. That is still something that we might have to look at in 2022, but is not included in the 2021 budget. So all told, $87 million worth of reductions over the two-year budget. and it's probably most that we've had to reduce in a very long time, if not the largest reduction we've had to contend with. So let me start by talking a little bit about police services. I suspect we'll get some questions about this later on in the show, but the police department proposed budget is $487 million. The 2020 budget was $479 million. All of that increase is really due to the last year of our agreement with the Police Officers Association. That agreement expires next year in 2021, and police officers are due to receive a combined 5% pay adjustment in the last year of that contract. That when we make adjustments to the budget to accommodate what's required in the contract and state law, we had to add in $13 million into the budget. We've made a number of other adjustments in the budget. We reduced overtime, I mentioned that earlier, at $3.4 million, and we moved some functions and funding and positions out of the police department into other areas of the city for moving. So that was a total of about $1.6 million. So we added 13. We netted out $5 million out of the police department budget, and that's how we get to our $8 million proposed budget. That's only a 1.7% increase in the proposed budget, and is a much lower percentage increase than the police department has seen in the past. Public safety and police always have historically been high priorities of the council and the community, and we have worked hard to fill all of our vacant positions. Right now, we are slightly over our authorized strength with our cadet classes that are in place right now. And so we are also accepting a grant from the Department of Justice to add 25 officers to provide 24 hours, 7-day-a-week law enforcement coverage for those domestic violence victims that may need protective orders or that type of service from the police department. Right now, we don't provide that 24 hours a day. And so that federal grant will help fill that void for us from a service perspective. The other thing that I laid out to the council on August 6th is kind of a proposed process to really examine kind of our expectations, the council's expectations, the public's expectations for the police department in the future. And it really revolves around 4 different efforts. One is kind of those foundational or cornerstone issues of things like accountability and discipline, hiring and training, transparency, and how we engage the community. And some of those items are governed by the collective bargaining agreement, and some of those are not. They're how the chief or the manager oversee the department, what our expectations are, and so those are the things that we want to look at adjusting so that we have a police department that reflects the values and expectations that we have from a service perspective. And the second area that we should look at is really what the expectations are and what the role of the police is. And more importantly, what are the encounters that we put our police officers in? And that'll revolve around a review of our calls for service. We get 2.1 million calls for service a year to the police department. And there are probably a fair amount of calls that come into the 911 center that obviously may not be emergencies. Depending on what happens, they could turn out to be emergencies. But really examining those calls and deciding whether or not those are things that really require the police department's a response to. Part of that is going to require getting input, and Councilwoman Haverger, you're the chair of the Public Safety Committee. I suspect a lot of this conversation will center there in that council committee. But the input from the council, neighborhood associations, grassroots organizations, and others throughout the city, because I think as I've talked to different folks, everybody's got a different expectation. And if we're going to set a standard for our expectations, we need to probably have that conversation with the community and make sure that we balance that approach. The last area is, sorry, Laura. That's Laura telling me to hurry up. So the last area is really examining the response alternatives that may exist based on the review of expectations and input. And you know, I think intuitively, I believe that homeless calls and mental health calls do require potential law enforcement involvement. But are there others that can help mitigate and provide a service? And that's part of the review I want to make sure that we go through. It could include other departments or other providers. And really, I think that's kind of a catch-all area once we go through expectations and input. Next slide. So one of the things that we're doing in the proposed budget is recommending the creation of a violence prevention division in our Metro Health Department. And it's really an effort to consolidate all of our violence prevention efforts into one area of our organization, whether it's gun violence or domestic violence or youth violence. We're also proposing to add $1.3 million into this as part of this $9 million division to expand our Stand-Up SA program that's been in place for about 5 years now. The Stand-Up SA folks are our outreach workers, our violence interrupters. They've been very successful on the east side, and we're looking to add an additional 12 positions to expand it to the west side of San Antonio. We're also recommending that we move 20 crisis response team employees who work very closely with domestic violence victims and the police department. Right now, they are in the police department, and we're recommending we move them into Metro Health so that we've got some synergy on how we're approaching and preventing violence regardless of the program. Next slide. Mental health investments, $6 million for our mental health programs. Right now, we contract for clinicians to support our SAPD mental health unit and our human services homeless outreach teams and support for children and families. The proposed budget is recommending we set aside an unallocated $500,000 to possibly utilize as a funding source, depending on how we go through that review of alternative response mechanisms. And this money could be used to beef up on-call clinicians or add those caseworker social service type of individuals to help improve our response to some of these community issues. Next slide. We have $30 million in the proposed budget to address homelessness, and probably the highlight that I want to share with you is that when the council approved the Recovery and Resiliency Program in June, we used federal funds to create a homeless outreach team, and the general fund, the city's budget adds additional employees that are city funded so that we can expand that outreach team. It's had a fair amount of success just over the past summer as it's kicked off, and it's really focused on building trust with those homeless folks that are in encampments. This has become an issue citywide during COVID because a number of the shelters closed their doors for incoming service and so that they could maintain physical distancing. So we're gonna expand this program right out of the chute. It's like I said, it's been a number of issues throughout the city. I know in District 6, the Marbach 410 area has continued to be an issue, and this is something that we've got a lot of hopes in. It's really focused on coordinating, connecting, and building that trust so that those individuals that need the help feel safe and are willing to accept that help. Next slide. We have $25 million in the proposed budget for our affordable housing, neighborhood housing services department. And this department has had to shift its priority since April. It's primarily run point on our emergency housing assistance program. And so going into fiscal year 21, we will be continued in that path. So the focus has shifted a little bit from affordable housing production to making sure people can stay in their homes during this period of the pandemic. And we're going to continue to monitor this. This was one of the pillars in our recovery program, and we have seen an uptick in activity and requests for assistance here during the month of August. So we provide monthly updates to the council, and I suspect we'll continue to have to make adjustments to this as the year goes on. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, we have $102 million in street maintenance in the proposed budget, almost 1,300 projects for 371 centerline miles. That's out of our 4,000 plus centerline mile network of streets that we have in the city. Earlier in the spring, when we had to readjust our budgets due to falling revenues, we delayed $43 million in street projects. That $43 million worth of projects are the number one priority, the first priorities of this $102 million fiscal year 21 budget as we go into next year, and hopefully we can get back on track because I know it's a critical issue really throughout the city. And then we have $18 million set aside to put back in $67 million of usable sidewalks. 61 miles of this are new sidewalks to fill in gaps that we have throughout the city. And then the other 6 miles are as part of our repair program in replacing those segments of sidewalks that have been uplifted by maybe tree roots and aren't usable now. A couple of project highlights that we wanted to include for District 6 that are in the 21 budget. We have Timberhurst from Timber Place to Timber Climb, Timber Path from Village Park to Ridge Arbor, Wood Circle from cul-de-sac to cul-de-sac, and Lawton Street from Acme to Southwest 40th. And then sidewalk projects that we have, Middle Point from Charter Point to Point's Edge, and Enrique M. Barrera Parkway from Abshire to Southwest 38th Street. And in terms of our capital budget in District 6, just some projects we wanted to highlight that'll be going into construction. We have Tesla Road City, North San Antonio Hills Park, Piper's Meadow Park, Enrique Barrera Parkway Phase 1, and Heath Road, Grissom Road intersection. Just real quick on our hotel occupancy tax fund. This fund provides resources so that we can operate the convention center and the Alamo Dome and arts and cultural department and our contribution to Visit San Antonio, the marketing arm of the city. The FY 2020 budget assumed $129 million would be collected in revenue. And as you see on the chart there, we're expecting to end the year at $69 million. So a very steep drop-off in revenue this year. And we're looking at, in the 2021 budget, a combined $78 million that we're proposing in the budget. Activity has slowed. A lot of events have canceled. And as we worked with a number of economists, we're looking at a multiple-year recovery in this area of our business. All of our businesses in this fund had to make significant cuts, almost as many cuts in terms of dollar value that we had to make in the $1.28 billion general fund. This is one of the areas of the organization that we kind of check the financial pulse of on a weekly basis, and we'll continue to do so as we go into 2021. And then the last business area that I wanted to mention was our airport, where we are expecting a 49% decrease over where we were at in 2019 and an 11% decrease going into 2021. So the airport budget had to accommodate almost $34 million in projected revenue loss. The airport was a direct recipient of CARES Act money from the federal government, and we programmed that money out over a 36-month period to help manage out this slowly but surely recovery. Pre-COVID, we had on average about 15,000 people departing from the airport on a daily basis. We got down to a low of about 600 in late April, early May, and earlier this week, we're at 5,000 departures. So it is slowly been picking up. Activities continue to be picked up, and we'll be closely monitoring this. And the aviation team has done a really good job of making sure that that facility is clean and ready for use. Solid waste management, there's no rate change in solid waste for next year, but this is a good opportunity to remind people that if you have a 96-gallon brown can and it's not full, when you take it out to the curb every week, to consider downsizing and saving a little bit of money. If you downsize from the 96-gallon to the 48-gallon, you can save yourself $144 a year. We are continuing to encourage people to fill the blue and green cans that we use and avoid sending some of the garbage to the landfill. And so please, if you're interested in doing this, please call 311 and we'll schedule the swap out for you. So just kind of where we're at in terms of budget calendar, the budget work session is, council budget work sessions are ongoing. The council had 4 presentations this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, and that'll continue through the middle of September. We are going through community input and town halls like this evening through the first week in September. We have 2 public hearings scheduled on September 2nd and September 10th. And the council is scheduled to adopt the budget on September 17th. For those of you that might be interested, we do have a budget transparency tool on our website, and the address is on the slide. And we have an OpenGov portal where you can go see the line item budget, the line item proposed FY21 budget. You can also see the individual revenue sources that we count on. And you can take a look back for the last 5 years, historical budget information by all of our funds and all of our departments. So if you're curious, I'd encourage you to take a look at that tool. It's probably gotten more use this year than past years, and it's there to make sure that that type of information is available to the public. So just in summary, a lot of uncertainty still remains, and particularly from a service perspective and a public health perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And we will continue to very closely manage our financial situation. We did that quickly in the springtime. It made the summer a little bit more manageable, but still difficult. As we start to see trends occur from a financial standpoint, we'll make sure that we make the council aware of it, but then put a plan in action to deal with it quickly. Just like your household budget, not dealing with some of these financial issues will exponentially grow the issue. And so we want to continue to closely monitor that. The organization will continue to focus on the response and the recovery programs, whether they are workforce development or housing security or small business assistance. And although a lot of city departments have had to change the way they are servicing our constituents and the citizens, we'll continue to be nimble in that sense. We're all committed to continue to provide service to the community. It looks a little bit differently right now, and hopefully we can get back to some level of normalcy. And Councilwoman, I just wanted to thank all the departments that are on tonight and taking their time out to help us answer questions. I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Eric. A lot of information there. Yeah, just a reminder, we do have many city officials here on the line. If you do want to ask them questions, we've got representatives from our major departments. But let me start with Councilwoman Cabello-Haverda. What's your reaction to this budget and the trying times that we're in? What are you hearing from your residents?
Well, I can empathize that balancing the budget in these times of fiscal stress, I'm sure, is an overwhelming challenge. And I mentioned earlier, we have a truly talented team. For those of you out in our communities that you don't get to see the city work every day like I do, it's a really, really impressive feat that they accomplish every day. So I'm grateful for them. I think that, this year we've had to identify priorities and make tough choices. It's not, I can't say it enough, it's not easy to do that. So it's important to have these meetings presenting the budget so that our city government is transparent and accountable to our citizens. Reminder that this is a great opportunity for our District 6 residents to have, to be heard, to have their voice heard. So I'm grateful for that. And always impressed with Eric being able to talk so knowledgeably for so long. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Well, let's get started with some of our live questions. Just a reminder, if you have a question for the city, you can comment right here on our Facebook feed, or you can also text that question. Just enter 55000 to the number and then text SA Speak Up 1 plus your question. So the first one here, Maria, I'm going to give to you, and this comes to us from Facebook. And Kim says, can we please consider citywide free Wi-Fi? So what is our budget doing for Wi-Fi and the digital divide?
Thank you for that question. And, the city manager talked about our resiliency and recovery plan. And there is a budget of about $27 million to be able to make enhancements on digital inclusion, specifically for those areas of town where that is a problem. And our goal is to be able to connect those kids and the youth to their schools. So when they're at home having to do some of the virtual classes, that they have access to the network from their schools. In addition to that, a program that we started maybe about 2 years ago is to have Wi-Fi at the parks. And those locations that people tend to congregate, we have been able to do that in a majority of our parks, and we plan to continue to do so. Also in our community centers, and more importantly, in our libraries as well. So those are alternatives for the community that need to have access to free Wi-Fi. Even though during this pandemic, some of our services have been modified, we have about 9 libraries across the city that are providing access to computers for those individuals that need to access them. So you can visit our website for those specific locations near you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Our next question here also comes to us from Facebook, and Chief McManus, this one is for you. Mariah Smith says, redirect funds to community relations and retrain the police force on de-escalation practices, mandatory body cams, and consequences for firing and misconduct. So, Chief, can you touch on each of those topics and maybe provide some answers to Mariah there?
You're on mute, Chief. You're on mute.
So thanks for the question. There were a lot of them, and I'm probably not going to be able to remember all of them. I'll have to ask for a repeat. But let's talk about training. We are looking at training for changing the way we do things next year to a certain degree. One of the things that we're looking at is computer-based training, so that the block of training that we get at the beginning of the year or sometime during the year for in-service training, we can pick that up much more frequently by using a computer-based or a virtual learning platform. So we plan on doing that. As far as diverting funds, that'll be up to the council to consider that. Help me out with the other ones, Laura.
Sure. So, Chief, Mariah also asked about mandatory body cams and what the conduct is, the consequences are for misconduct in the police force. So maybe you can touch on a little bit of that.
Well, we have everyone wears body cams, and there are rules and regulations as to how they're supposed to be used. At every call that you go on, that body cam's got to be turned on. And as far as consequences for misconduct, anytime there's a complaint, no matter how minor it may seem, it's investigated either at the line level by supervisors or, in the more serious cases, by internal affairs. So that goes through a process. It goes to a administrative complaint review board. That board makes recommendations to me once the internal affairs investigation is finished and forwarded to them for review. I call the officer in. We have a meeting about it, and then corrective action is taken based on what the final facts are and the recommendation of the board.
Laura, let me jump in there real quick. Yeah, let me add, because first of all, we were one of the first cities, large police departments, to completely deploy body cameras. Everybody wears them; they're required. The other part of the question about de-escalation training is included right now, but that's an example. I mean, what the chief is describing is possibly looking to change how we do training with officers right now. All officers are required to go through an annual training. And I think what the chief is describing is, rather than doing it once a year, maybe making it a little bit more frequent and a little bit more meaningful. And then the last thing that I'll just add on the last question that the chief asked, that's really the issue that is one of those cornerstone issues about how we think that the city, the chief and the city should have kind of a final role in deciding how to hold officers accountable if there is an inappropriate action. And that's the issue that will undoubtedly be a top priority, will be a top priority in our discussions with the union in the next contract. I think the council's already talked about that. And it goes to the point where if the chief terminates an officer and the officer gets his or her job back because of arbitration, regardless of what the inappropriate action was, then that's not a balanced system, and that's what needs to change.
Thank you, Eric and Chief. Councilman, let's have you chime in on that as well.
Just real quick, as Chair of Public Safety, I've been working closely with the city, of course, to look more closely at a lot of these issues. The one that really stands out to me that Mariah mentioned was the training. We've been having really good discussions about that, and I'm excited to have those discussions publicly and at the public safety meetings. So I invite anybody listening to also listen in on the public safety meetings where we'll have these discussions much more in depth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. That's a great point. And for those who are interested in those committee meetings, you can always visit sanantonio.gov/agenda and check out those upcoming council meetings and committee dates. Our next question here comes to us from Eddie Coyad, and this is for Jennifer Harriet. And he asks, what is the increase for stand-up SA? A lot of people are asking for their services to be funded, but they do not already know that some of those services exist in San Antonio. So Jennifer, tell us about the stand-up SA program. And you're on mute, Jennifer. It's a story of the pandemic. Everyone might be on mute. There we are.
Hopefully I'm not going to echo.
You're good.
Okay. So Stand Up SA is funded by about an additional $1 million so that we can go from having a Stand Up SA program on the east side of San Antonio to the near west side of San Antonio as well. So it will add about 10 outreach workers that will focus on the east side, as I mentioned, on the east side and the west side. And as Eric mentioned, these are individuals that are considered violence interrupters. So when a violent act occurs in the community, especially related to gun violence, these individuals go out in the community and see what they can do to prevent additional violence from occurring in the community.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So our next question here is about homelessness initiatives. And Eric, I know you touched on that a little bit in your presentation, but Patrick, is there anything you can expand upon for what homelessness initiatives are included in this year's budget?
Yes, thanks, Laura. The city manager talked a little bit about the new outreach team. So we're adding positions that will cover every council district plus an extra one in the downtown area. We have had some success with this with some pilot projects in the Delview area in District 1, as well as a clinical social worker in District 10 area. And as Eric mentioned, it's really about working in a specific area day in, day out, seeing the same folks who maybe have been there for a while, and building that trust with them so that we can move them off the street and into a better housing situation. And that can start with things as simple as getting their ID back, getting them food or water, whatever their basic needs are, and then building from there into progressively more service that can help them get into that permanent housing, which is what we would ultimately want them to see. So the budget does include that. It's a combination of local and federal funds. We know that it's been a gap in the community. We did a strategic plan process earlier this year, and that was one of the draft recommendations showed that is a need in the community. And so at the same time, we're working with all the providers, all the nonprofits that do so much good work around homelessness to ensure that this model works with them, works with the entire homeless system to be responsive to people's needs.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. We're going to jump back over to some of the questions that were submitted to us by email. Stephanie and Elisa and several others also asked about the police department's funding. So Eric, I know you covered this in your presentation, but Stephanie and Elisa asked about reallocating funds and also why is SAPD receiving an $8 million increase in this budget? So can you tell us how this year's budget came together on the police front and what we can expect from the process that you put forward?
Well, and I mentioned it during the presentation, so I won't repeat everything, but primarily all the increase is due to that the 5% pay raise that's mandated within the collective bargaining agreement, and again, all that cost $13 million. The budget's only going up $8 million because we moved $5 million. We either eliminated $5 million in overtime, 3.4, and then moved out $1.6 million. So that's what's driving the entire issue. And you know what will happen through the process? I guess the goal of that process is to, in my mind, number one, make sure that we've got a transparent, accountable system in the police department. Number two, to make sure that we are responding to the types of calls that we want to put police officers in those types of encounters. And three, whether or not there are other ways to deal with some of the types of calls the police department responds to and how we're going to pay for them. That process is not designed to end with a big target to cut the police department. Obviously, that'll be a conversation that the council will have as they go through the policy level discussion. But my goal is to kind of refocus the department, improve hiring, improve training, make sure that we've got an accountable system in the department, and that we're thoughtful about the encounters that we all want police officers to be in.
Thank you. And we have a somewhat related question here that came up on Facebook. Mariah had asked about the body cams and the other items there for police, and she'd like for us to talk about chapters 174 and 143. So Cam, let's start with you. So for those who might not be aware, can you tell us what those chapters are, chapters 174 and 143?
You're on mute.
Cam, I think you're muted. Hashtag you're muted.
My computer, not my phone. Therefore, civil service protection for fire and police officers as well as for collective bargaining. They were both passed by petitions initiated by the community back in the 70s, and they've been in existence for the city ever since.
No, Laura,
go ahead.
Chapter 143 was, I think, approved in the late 40s.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And then Chapter 174, which is collective bargaining, was approved in the mid 70s.
Right.
And what it does is Chapter 143 is like the foundation of civil service for police and fire, and Chapter 174 is that additional layer that gives, at least here in San Antonio, police officers and firefighters the ability to collectively negotiate wages, working conditions, and those types of things.
Thank you. And the next question here is regarding violence prevention. So Jennifer, Harriet, can you talk to us about the violence prevention division that's being proposed for Metro Health and what that division would do?
Sure. So the main three areas of focus will be gun violence prevention, domestic violence prevention, and youth and young person violence prevention. And so that area will include the work we've been doing around ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, as well as our Too Good for Violence program and our parenting education program called Triple P. The gun violence prevention is really surrounded the stand-up SA programs and the expansion into the West Side. And then the domestic violence is work that we're expanding, that we've been doing for the last couple of years. But as Eric mentioned, we will be bringing over some of the crisis response teams over from SAPD to work closely with us on addressing domestic violence in our community. We'll continue to expand on the Love Is campaign, as well as have some domestic violence high-risk teams within the community.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So I know a lot of folks have some more questions, and keep in mind if we don't get to them tonight, we will try to respond to as many as we can here on our Facebook feed, or if you text them to us. But with that, Councilwoman, let's wrap things up a little bit. What are you hearing from your District 6 residents, and what do you want them to know about this year's budget process?
Well, first, thank you to all our city leaders who took time this evening to present the proposed budget and answer these very, very pressing and important questions. Tonight really was a lot of what I'm hearing. You know, a lot of it is about our police budget and changes that people are telling me they need to be made. And everyone is stepped up to meet the challenge, making the needed compromises and finding solutions to balance the budget. But we're not done. So I'll ask you to continue to call my office with further questions. I'm going to repeat the number 210-207-7065. The majority of questions that I'm already getting by email, calls in my office are really the city services. A lot of what we talked about tonight, street maintenance, library, parks, I mentioned earlier. And then on that sort of equal par is a lot of questions about police funding. So we're continuing to work on that. We're continuing to hear you and I make decisions based on what my residents are telling me. And I thank you to our District 6 residents who are here to be part of this process to help shape the city budget. Know that my team and I are always available to you. Our field office is still closed, but I'm sure you've seen me and my team out there driving your neighborhoods. I have to take just a moment to say I truly value your input, and I really miss seeing everyone at neighborhood gatherings and HOA meetings. Last year, Eric came out to the district and we had a great turnout, and it was really, really nice to be able to be face to face. So I look forward to doing that again soon, but together we'll get through these difficult times and continue to build our thriving community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Eric, one more time, let's wrap things up for people. What's coming up next in the budget process?
So we've got additional council work sessions next week, next Tuesday and Wednesday. And one of those days we'll be talking about infrastructure and public works and the streets. And then on Wednesday, we'll be talking about our hotel occupancy tax fund and our airport fund. Councilwoman, I'm going to mention that the Public Safety Committee is going to have a meeting next week. And one of the topics that the group is going to talk about is more conversation about the police budget. So I wanted to kind of share that with the public. And other than that, we've got a lot of work to do. So appreciate the feedback. And Councilwoman, thanks for having us tonight.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And just a reminder, if you'd like to check out the budget, the proposed budget, you can visit sanantonio.gov/budget. You can check out more of these community virtual nights and all council meetings at sanantonio.gov. Just click on agenda and you'll be able to see that full calendar of events. And stay safe. If you need anything, call 311 or just visit us at sanantonio.gov. Have a great night.
Good night.